Hello, everyone. I hope you are well. It is time for another episode of It's Time We Talk. Now, today, I didn't have this episode planned for today, but I wanted to come on here and sort of talk about something that I've been seeing a lot on social media, conversations with colleagues, with friends, with acquaintances, and it has to do with overall the position of manager or head coach in sports in general, but I'm going to be sort of narrowing it down to baseball since that's what's, I believe, most prevalent at the moment. Now, I mention this because in the news are two firings of managers in Major League Baseball and one who is on the brink of going. So Alex Cora on Saturday was relieved of his duties as Boston Red Sox manager after a horrid start to the season, which was pretty funny because they had beaten the Orioles 17-1 that day. Uh, Rob Thompson on Tuesday was fired after another horrid start for the Phillies this season. And a lot of the conversation as a Mets fan I've seen is that Carlos Mendoza has to go. And even I talked about it on the very last episode of It's Time We Talk. I talked about maybe it is time for him to go. But I talked about something that I think was very prevalent and was much more important. And that's that when things are going wrong, it is so easy for people to blame the manager or the head coach. We see this in many different sports, not just in baseball. But I am of the opinion that they are not the sole issue with their teams. And I think if you talk to a Red Sox fan or a Phillies fan or a Mets fan, I would hope that they're smart enough to acknowledge the fact that Rob Thompson wasn't the sole issue. Alex Cora wasn't the sole issue. Carlos Mendoza is not the sole issue. I believe there was, it made the rounds on social media. There was a former Red Sox player who commented on the firing of Alex Cora and said, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was like defecating in your pants and changing your shirt. Now, he didn't use the word defecating, but you understand what I mean. Um, and while I do sort of agree with that, I do also think, Thompson, Cora, Mendoza, they do have blame. There should be some blame that's put on them. They aren't totally not guilty of what's going on with the Red Sox, Phillies, and Mets, respectively. But I think when you look at it, I think the intelligent fans of these fan bases and the intelligent baseball fan who is tuned in to what's going on, I think they'll be able to tell you that this is a much bigger issue. I will go over it as a Mets fan again. I don't have immense. I don't watch every single Phillies game. I don't watch every single Red Sox game. So I can't dissect every single issue within the club. But I would have to imagine, as is the case with a lot of different situations, that the front office, the players, the owners are far more guilty of the club's issues than the manager is. We look at the Red Sox, and while I said I don't have immense knowledge of what goes on in Boston, I do know that John Henry, the owner of the Red Sox, I know that Craig Breslow, the GM, is getting a lot of flack from some sections of the fan base as well. Those who are more tuned in. And that is where the lion's share of the blame and the criticism should probably go. I think the reason why you see the manager or the head coach fired instead of people like this is because, look, at the end of the day, I bet you John Henry and the other front office members of the Red Sox appointed Craig Breslow because they thought he was the right guy for the job. And when you were in a position of power in sports like this, ego is an incredible thing. Now, you always want to know that the decisions that you make are the correct ones. Excuse me. You always want to make sure that the decisions you make are the correct ones. And even if they aren't, in some cases, your ego is so big that you don't want to be proved wrong. All right? Now, maybe at the beginning, Craig Breslow's hire made a lot of sense to John Henry. Maybe the appointment of David Stearns by Steve Cohen in the Mets front office, maybe that made a lot of sense. And I will say, as a Mets fan, I was excited to get David Stearns from Milwaukee, all of the work that he had done to build a consistent team that made the playoffs. I was excited about that, especially considering some of the poor GMs that the Mets have had in the past. Now, you have these people who are in GM, CEO, COO, whatever the case may be, directors, this, that, the other. They are in such prominent positions of power that they're not going to fire themselves. They're not going to get fired by the people that they work with because of the fact they have so much power within the club. And of course, in the case of John Henry's not going to sell. Steve Cohen is not going to sell. I'm trying to look up the owners of the Phillies. John S. Middleton, the owner and CEO of the Phillies, he's not going to sell. And I don't think he's going to fire Preston Mattingly, who is the GM of the Phillies. So it comes down to you're not able to. Let's say, now I'm not saying that they are huge issues in the club, but let's say Bryce Harper is playing abhorrently bad. I know this isn't the case, but let's just use this as an example. Let's say Bryce Harper's playing extraordinarily bad. His contract is so massive, and he's on such a crazy wage that even if he was playing some of the worst baseball he's ever played, he is still, in year 7 of a 13-year deal worth $330 million, they would still probably need to keep him. He has a full no trade clause, no opt-outs. Bryce Harper, he would still have to be paid his money, however much that would end up being, right? So you can't just cut him. The same way I don't think if Lindor or Bichette or Soto were the problem in New York, if Garrett Crochet, Trevor Story, guys like that, if they were the problem in Boston. And it just seems to me like they have more leverage than the manager, right? Which makes sense because they get paid more than the manager. They are much more famous than the manager in most cases. So it creates this environment where if you have a job, right, and if you are not doing your job, you don't get paid as much as your boss does in most situations. If I'm working at Walmart, right, and I'm a cashier and I don't do my job very well, they're not going to fire my boss because I'm not doing well. They're going to fire me because I'm more expendable than my boss is. So when you look at this and you think to yourself, all right, managers are supposed to be in charge. They're supposed to make the big decisions on game day. They're supposed to make the lineups and make decisions as to who comes in the bullpen, things like that. Making those decisions. And when things go wrong, let's just say that it's a player issue. Let's say that's the case. It's not the players who get fired. It's not the players who get cut. It's the manager. You think to yourself, what? That shouldn't make sense. The manager should be allowed to, you know, he should be allowed to see out a vision. Now, sometimes I'm not saying that managers are void of all guilt or are void of all blame. That's not what I'm saying. You can make a case that Rob Thompson, Alex Cora, Carlos Mendoza are just not good at their job and they deserve to go. You can make that case, fine. But what I'm saying is there's a much bigger issue. I don't think that the Red Sox or the Phillies are going to automatically become much better teams because they got rid of Rob Thompson and Alex Cora respectively. I don't think the Mets are going to become a better team when they fire Carlos Mendoza. I don't think that's going to be the case because in this situation, I think that there are much bigger issues. I talked about in the last episode, I talked about David Stearns and how he remolded this Mets team, taking out Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, Edwin Diaz, guys like that, replacing them with guys who have had horrible starts to the season. Right? And these struggles, I think, come more from the higher-ups than they do from the manager. But like I said, managers can still be at fault. I'm not saying that they are void of any blame. I think it is time for us to look at what is going on in baseball. Take a look at the job that managers are doing, the job that players are doing, the job that the GM and the higher-ups are doing. And look at who really deserves a lion's share of the blame. Now, when a team comes off to a horrible start like these three teams have, I think everybody deserves some blame. All right? I can say in the Mets case, the players are not playing well enough. There are players making extraordinary money who are just not good enough and should not be paid wages like that to play the way that they are. I think the manager, from the beginning, I never wanted Carlos Mendoza. I think the fact that he was able to be shoehorned into this position after Beltran resigned, take the Mets to the playoffs, I think that was very admirable. And this is the second season where the Mets have not gotten off to they haven't really met expectations. So maybe it is time for Mendoza to go. But I think before Mendoza goes, I think before Cora went and before Thompson went, you've got to look at the GM. You've got to look at the people making the decisions on the roster. Who's bringing in players? Who's, where are the draft picks coming from? All these different kinds of questions. Take a look at that before you start blaming the manager for everything. That's just what I think. Am I speaking sense? Am I speaking nonsense? I don't know. I just wanted to get on here and sort of have a chance to say what I wanted to say about the trend of managerial firings in the MLB. I say the trend. There's been 2, maybe 3 within the next week. Maybe it'll take longer for Mendoza to go. And I imagine that this probably won't be the only managerial firing in season. I think one more thing that I'll mention before I go, you give the job in the Phillies case to Don Mattingly, which I don't hate because Don Mattingly has been a manager before, hasn't had the most success. I know he was with the Marlins for a long time. Mattingly, managerial record. I mean, he has a losing record as a manager. He did manage the Dodgers for a few years, which helps, I guess. But I don't think that's a bad pick. I know he is the father. I'm pretty sure he is the father of Preston Mattingly, who is the GM of the Phillies. So I don't mind that appointment. I think it is very short-sighted, as this needs to be, because you're firing a manager not even in the middle of the season, at the very beginning. We're not even in May yet. And you're firing your manager, which I just think is wild. But anyway, but I don't think Don Mattingly is going to lead the Phillies to an extraordinary run. Maybe they might be, the rest of the season might be 500. Maybe he'll be able to get a bounce once he becomes manager and sort of lead the team. I can't remember who the Red Sox brought in, but even if they go and try to hire an interim manager, do you really see things getting much better for the Red Sox? I'm not saying that they're going to get worse. They'll probably get a little bit better. I won't lie. They probably will have a good run of form. Same with the Mets once they fire Mendoza, because I think Kai Correa, the bench coach, I think he's going to get the job. I think the bench coach got the job in Boston. But I think it's not going to provide this season turnaround that fans probably think is going to happen. No, things are probably going to stay more the same. They'll get a little bit better, but they won't be incredible. You know what I mean? I think there's still a lot of time for these teams to become playoff teams, but I don't think that they'll become playoff teams because of the manager, the same way I don't think that their downfall is because of the previous manager. So that, like I said, that's just my 2 cents. Am I speaking sense? Am I speaking nonsense? Let me know what you think. Like I said, I just wanted to have a chance to mini rant, you could say, but I just think there's a lot to discuss, and I wanted to sort of put my opinion out there. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on the next episode. Take care.